All right, this is nervous system. Nervous system has two parts. First, you have the CNS, stands for central nervous system. And second, you have peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system. Now, from the name of these two types, which one sounds more important? Well, the central nervous system definitely sounds more important, and it definitely is more important. The central nervous system ha, uh, includes your brain and the spinal cord. So your brain and the spinal cord. And you can literally draw it like this, just a brain and a spinal cord. That would be your central nervous system. That's all. Next, the peripheral system. That's everything that extends from your spinal cord, the nerves in your arm, in your leg, in your foot. They're all part of the peripheral nervous system, and they carry information to and from the periphery to the central nervous system, where it gets processed. All right, next, the structure of a neuron. When you think of a neuron, you might think of it as a thick strand of fiber or whatever. But in reality, a neuron is just a single cell. Think that through. A neuron that transmits all the electrical message, tells you to blink and run and stuff, is actually just a single cell. Now it starts with the cell body. So the cell body is on one end. You can kind of draw it like a little star. Now this one is different to all the other cells we've seen because all the other cell are round, but this one isn't. This one has a really special shape. And we call the extensions that extends from the cell body the dendrites. And from the main cell body, we have a long piece of fiber we call the axon. The axon, around the axon, there are these things called myelin sheath, and they are insulators. They insulate they help to they insulate so the electrical message can conduct better in the axon. And once this finishes, on the end you have the axon terminals. So they're kind of like a tree root. They extend kind of in all directions, kind of messy, and that's what we call an axon terminal. So you can think of an axon and the myelin sheath around it as a wire. The axon is a wire, is the actual copper wire, and the myelin sheath around it is the plastic insulator around it. And they pretty much do the same thing, the myelin sheath and insulator around the wire. So there are three types of neurons. The one we just drew is actually a motor neuron. The first one we need to know is a sensory neuron. So we draw the dendrites, the axon terminals, and this time we notice that the cell body doesn't isn't at one end of the neuron. It's actually uh, extended from the side of the neuron. So it's pretty weird looking like this. Sensory neuron. And the second type is interneuron. Like the name suggests, the position of the cell body is actually in the middle of the neuron. Pretty awkward space. But the reason for this is interneuron are the neurons present in the in the central nervous system, and the neurons in there don't really go or to anywhere, so they don't send message to or from anywhere. They just process the information coming from your peripheral nervous system. They help you think. They are the neurons you use when you think in your brain and not do anything with your body. So this is the cell body. And the next one we have is the motor neuron. Similar to the one we just drew, cell body on one end and a axon extending from it. And on the other end, we have the effector. In this case, a muscle. We can use the example of seeing a snake to connect all three types together. So there's a snake in the road, just lying there, but it sees you. It comes at you and it's going to bite you. Your eye sees this stimulus. So your eye will be the what you call it, the receptor. It detects the stimulus and it's like, okay, it sends a message through the sensory neuron, down here to the start of a inner neuron. So this is your coordinator here. You coordinated thinking, processing the message. What is the animal? Why is it coming after me? Should I run? Should I not run? And you make decisions. So you're like, oh, it's a snake. I don't want to die, so I should better run. And this message is then transmitted to the start of your motor neuron. And your motor neuron carries this message, sends it to the effector, in this case, your muscle. So your muscle tenses and prepares you to run. So the response is you run away from the snake. Easy. All right. Last thing we need to know, synapse and neurotransmitters. So a synapse is uh, the connection of the end of one neuron and the start of the next neuron. And what I think it looks like your knee, right? Or any joint or joint, just a random joint in your body. It looks like the end of one bone and the start of the next bone, but whatever. That's how I remember this. But in reality, this is actually the uh, the end of one axon and the start of the next neuron. So these two neurons don't actually touch. Question is, how the heck do they transmit the message if these two don't physically touch, even though they're just separated by a tiny, tiny distance? As you can see, there's a gap in the middle here. And the reason for that gap is so you can have neurotransmitters. These are tiny, tiny particles that come in here, right? Neurotransmitters. And these come from the end of the last neuron. So these come in little vesicles that contain neurotransmitters and they get released into the synaptic cleft. They get released into the synaptic cleft. And these neurotransmitters actually are detected by the receptors on the next neuron. And it signals the neuron to keep transmitting the same message. Amazing, right? Instead of being connected, it just releases a particle, a particle, a molecule, you call it, and small neurotransmitters, and they are picked up by the receptors of the next neuron. Thus, an impulse is connected like this from one neuron to the next neuron. And what some anesthetic do is they could flush the synaptic cleft with other things. Thus, the neurotransmitters aren't actually picked up by the receptors. So you won't have this message continuing on from here on. Another way that anesthetic work is they use competitive inhibitors. So they bind with the receptors on the start of the next neuron. So these receptors don't pick up don't bind with the neurotransmitters when they come in the synaptic cleft. Thus, same principle, no reaction happens. They don't bind together, nothing happens. So the message does not continue and stops from there on. So this is a synapse. Oh, last thing we need to know, reflex arc pathway. So a reflex arc is a stimulus response model where the message doesn't actually isn't processed by your brain. So this is what you call an impulsive move, like when you put your hand in fire by accident, of course, you immediately pull your hand away as soon as you feel the heat. You don't just sit your hand in the fire and let it roast for a minute. You pull it away without your brain thinking. And the reason why you can pull your hand away so fast is because the message doesn't go to your brain. It actually goes to the spinal cord, not your brain. So you, we know that your hand is closer to your spinal cord than your brain. So it's going to travel a shorter distance. Thus, it comes back, goes there, comes back, and the message comes back at a in a shorter time. Thus, you're able to make quick response and keep yourself away from danger and keep the body safe from harmful stimulus. That's reflex arcs pathway, and that's unit 3.2 for you.